better this time. Okay, we are going to go over our vocabulary first, because I always like to start with the vocabulary first. So we're going to go over the vocabulary words. I am going to go out of order with the vocabulary words, just like I did yesterday. Let's see if somebody this time can tell me what the word means instead of me telling you what the word means. So one of our vocabulary words is the word row. Friends at home, there you go. There's the word row. It's number 8 on our vocabulary cards. What is a row? Or when we line our things up in a row, what are we doing? Yanessa, what does that mean, sweetie?
Like there's a row of something.
Right, if there's a row of something, how does it look?
That's in a row.
Right, it's all in a line. So when you have a row of something, things are arranged or put in a line, just like when we line up to go to recess or out to the cafeteria or something. We go in a row. We actually line up. Okay. Floppy is our next vocabulary word. Those puppies' ears are flappy. It's number 3 in your book on page 11. Floppy means what? If the puppy's ears are floppy, Zayden, how are they?
They're all in a very dragging your teeth.
Right, because they're doing what? If they're floppy, how are they hanging?
Down.
Right, they're hanging down and they're hanging very loosely, okay? So floppy means hanging down loosely. All right, Zayden, what does floppy mean?
Hanging down really loosely.
Fantastic, hanging down very loosely. Awesome. Okay. Then our next vocabulary word is the word straight. It's number 2 picture in your book on page 10. Kaden, what does it mean if something is straight?
It means if something like is not floppy or curly.
Not curly.
Like pushed down.
Straight doesn't necessarily mean pushed down.
Like brushed.
No, it doesn't mean brushed. So, eyes and ears are on now, okay? Straight means what, Gwen?
It means like flat, like it's not curly or fluffy. It's just straight.
It's not curly. It's not bendy.
It's not.
It's not twisty. It's not wavy, okay? Straight means not curly, not bendy, not twisty, not wavy. Kaden, what does straight mean?
Not curly, not wavy, not fluffy.
Straight means not curly, not twisty, not bendy, not wavy. What does straight mean?
Not curly, not fluffy, not wavy.
Okay, doesn't have anything to do with floppy there, buddy. Floppy has nothing to do with straight. Not bendy, not twisty, not wavy, not curly. Collars is our next vocabulary word. Number 7 in our vocabulary word on page 11 in your book. Levi, what are collars?
They can be made out of.
What are they first?
They go around pets' necks.
Yeah, something we put around our pet's neck. Now, tell me, Levi, what could they be made out of?
Level metal, cloth. And
Leather, metal, cloth, and there's one more thing that they could be made out of. Angelina, what?
metal.
Metal, leather, cloth, and... Jamie, do you know?
Gold.
Plastic. Plastic. Gold is a metal, Jamie, okay. So, collars are things that we usually put around a pet's neck that are made out of cloth, leather, plastic, or metal. Usually we put them around the pet's neck so that we can walk the pet or put a tag on the pet. All right. Stood is another vocabulary word. It's number 6 in our book, which is on page 11. If it says on the card that the dog stood 1 foot tall, it doesn't mean he's standing on his feet for 1 foot. The word stood in this case, Alina, means what?
Like, it doesn't matter if you're sitting down or standing up.
Right, it doesn't matter if you're sitting down or standing up because stood means what? Gwen, what does stood mean?
Like, from the tall.
Yeah, so how what?
How tall?
How tall it is, okay? So Alina, stood means how tall something is in this case, okay? If he stood 1 foot tall, it means he is 1 foot from the bottom of his feet to the top of his little doggy head. That's a small dog. Okay, curly is our next vocabulary word. It's actually the first vocabulary word in our book. I know Yanessa has curly hair, so I'm going to call on Yanessa to see if she can tell me what curly means.
It's twisty.
Yep.
And not straight.
Okay, very good. It's twisty. It's not straight. We say twisty, bendy, curvy. Definitely not straight, okay? Derek, grab your headphones, honey. Derek. Grab your headphones. Take your iPad. Go down to Mrs. Lehigh. She's waiting for you, okay? Okay. Drooled. Ooh, drooled is our next vocabulary word. The dog drooled. The Saint Bernard is drooling. Jamie, what does that mean if the dog drooled? Yeah, spit is coming out of its mouth. Or that fancy word for spit, saliva. Happens to people too. And last but not least, weighed. If you get weighed at the doctor's office, or you take your pet to the vet to get weighed, what does that mean, Logan?
It means, it means that when you get weighed, it shows people how heavy you are.
Yeah, it's a measurement. You stand on a scale to get a measurement of how heavy or light something is. Very good. Okay, now I got to go back over here so I can switch my screen. Today we are actually going to go to, we always have two stories that go together with our stories. So Henry and Mudge is our anchor text. That's the main story that we have, that we've been reading for the past couple days. But we also have a supporting story, or a story that's like Henry and Mudge. It's just a little bit different. And I believe that one starts on page, well, let me find it in here. And I'll tell you what page to find it in your hard reading book. I have it on my thing. Nope. Oh, maybe I don't have it. All right, let me find it this way. I want to say it starts on page like 30. So let's go to page 30 here. See if we can find it. There it is. Okay. It starts on page 30 in your hard reading book. So you need to turn to page 30. And it's a story that goes along with Henry and Mudge called All in the Family. Okay? Now, what I like to do is after we usually read our main story a couple of times, like we've read Henry and Mudge like 3 or 4 times now. After we read our main story a couple times, I like to read the supporting story, and then we always compare how the two stories are the same and how they are different. Because in some ways they're going to be alike, in some ways they're going to be not alike. Now, I also always like to talk about the type or the genre of story. You can look at it right there in your book. You don't have to look at it on the screen. So you can just look right there in your book and you'll be good to go, okay? This story is actually an informational text. So it's a different kind of story than our Henry and Mudge. An informational text. Inside that word informational, I see the word information. And when you find out information, it means you find out stuff. Yes, Yanessa, what's your question, honey?
I used to have a cat exactly like that.
Fantastic. Awesome sauce. Okay, so an informational text is a story that gives us information. So it's going to give us facts. It's going to tell us things that are true and that are real. Okay? Henry and Mudge was different because Henry and Mudge was realistic fiction. So it could be real, but it was a made-up story. It was still a make-believe story. This story, however, All in the Family, is a fact story. So everything we read in this story is completely true and is completely real. Now, also in these kinds of stories, informational text, you're going to see things called headings. And if you look at the boxes that you see on page 31, you're going to see there's letters that are in different colors at the tops of those boxes. Those are what we call a heading. And a heading is kind of like having a title to tell you what you're going to read in that box or on that page. And we're going to find that in our informational stories, we're going to see headings in every single one of them. So we're going to practice being familiar with that a lot, because by reading the heading, it helps your brain get ready to know what you're going to find out on that page, what kind of information you're going to find out, okay? So, I'm going to go ahead and read this. You can just follow along. And I'm going to point out some things as we go along, like where the headings are and that kind of stuff. And then we're going to compare how these two stories are alike and how they are different. So, All in the Family is written by Catherine Mackin. Here's our author. Remember, the author is the person that writes the stories. Let me bring this up right now. Even though we don't normally talk about this now, I'm going to talk about it now because you might as well learn it, because it's going to be something you're going to learn anyways. Here we have a lion. Here we have, it looks like a zoo. Over there, it looks like maybe a bush dog or a wombat or something. Do those pictures look like drawings? No. Those are actually photographs. There's a reason why we have photographs in almost every single one of our informational stories. The reason why we have that, and not just a drawing where somebody used colors and colored it in, is because the author wants you to see the real thing. The best way for you to see the real thing, unless you're standing in front of a lion, is to see a picture of it, right? An actual photograph of it. Now, an illustrator could draw a nice picture of a lion, yes, or one of these other animals. But I think it makes it so much more exciting to see an actual photograph of these things that the author is talking about, because then you can see what they look like in real life. Especially when it comes to stories about things that I may never ever see in real life, like animals in the bottom of the deep, deep ocean and things like that. We probably will never ever see those kinds of things, but if we see them in a photograph, then we actually have a chance to see what they look like, okay? So you're going to find a lot of photographs in our informational text. So now I'm going to read through our story, All in the Family, and you can follow along in your book or up on the screen, and then I will ask us some questions. At the San Antonio Zoo, you can see many amazing animals. Some of these animals may have a family member living in your neighborhood. All right, now up here at the very, very top of the next page, on page 31, in our first box, right here's our heading. So this is going to be like a title that tells us what we're going to be reading in this box. Different kinds of dogs. Bush dogs live in Central America and South America. They have straight brown fur in the wild. They eat large rodents. Pet dogs come in all shapes and sizes. They may have floppy ears or curly hair. They eat food made for dogs. Pet dogs should wear collars. Now we have a box down here on the bottom. It's talking about cats of all sizes. Lions belong to the cat family. They can grow up to be 8 feet long. Some have stood 4 feet tall. Lions hunt big animals in the wild. Most house cats do not weigh more than 15 pounds. They mostly eat special food for cats. However, some cats like to hunt for mice or birds. All right, now if you turn the page, there's one more page for our story. Caden, you should be turning the page in your book, buddy. There we go. Okay. Here we have a picture of a gigantic Komodo dragon lizard, and here we have a box, another heading in this box that says large lizards. Komodo dragons are the largest lizards. They can grow to 10 feet long. Some have weighed 500 pounds. The saliva of a Komodo dragon is dangerous. You would not want to be drooled on by a Komodo dragon. And then we have one more box with another heading, little lizards. There's a picture of a little lizard. Geckos belong to the lizard family. They are about 8 inches long. Adult geckos weigh about 1 to 2 ounces. Geckos eat insects. They can eat 10 crickets in a row. Fantastic. I learned a lot of information in that story. How about you? Did you learn a lot of information in that story? Okay, now, let's talk about how this story, All in the Family, is like our story, Henry and Mudge. Let's talk about how they are the same first. Okay, let's compare them and talk about how they are the same. So, Zayden, do you have a way of how they are the same?
Yeah. They're animals.
They talk about animals, right? Both stories talk about animals. Fantastic. Logan, do you have a way that they are the same?
No, but there is.
No. Do you have a way that they are the same? Because that's what we're talking about right now. Do you have a way that the two stories are the same? Okay. Jamie, do you have a way that the two stories are the same? They talk about animals. What else? Well, wait for the different part of that. Okay? But is there anything that's the same about the animals? I don't think in the story Henry and Mudge we talked about animals eating animals. But I want to talk about how is Henry and Mudge like this story? How are these two stories alike, okay? So, Gwen, do you have a way of how these two stories are like?
Yes, they both had animals in them.
Right, they have animals in them, and they both talked about dogs, right? Henry and Mudge talked about the dog Mudge. And then this story, even though it's an informational story and we learned about a lot more animals, it did talk about pet dogs, which is just like in Henry and Mudge. Now, let's figure out how these two stories are different. Let's contrast them. We just compared them and talked about how they are the same. Now let's contrast them and talk about how they're different. So Levi, tell me one way that these two stories are different. How is this story different than Henry and Mudge?
It's because they are real photos, and Henry and Mudge it's just made up.
Right, that's one way that they're different. In the story All in the Family, we have real photographs so that you can see the real things. But in Henry and Mudge, there's an illustrator who did some drawings or drew the pictures. Kaden, what's another way that they are different? How is this story All in the Family different than the Henry and Mudge story? Levi talked about how this story has photographs, but how else are they different?
They are like this. They're
Levi. Okay, Kaden, hocus pocus and focus, dude. Jamie, how else are they different?
Some animals, some people name animals as pets.
Right. In the story Henry and Mudge, we're only talking about a pet, right? In this story, All in the Family, we're talking about some animals that are pets like the cats and dogs, but we're also talking about a lot of animals that are not pets. You are not going to have a pet lion. You are not going to have a pet bush dog. You're not going to have a pet Komodo dragon. You maybe could have a pet gecko. That's possible.
I had a lizard.
But usually, you're not going to have a lot of the wild animals that we read about in this story as pets, right? So we're talking about different kinds of animals. Alina, how else are the two stories different?
Like Henry and Mudge, Mudge is just the bronzes, and like there's no other animals, but there's more animals in here.
Right, there are more animals in the All in the Family story, but what else do we have in the Henry and Mudge story that we don't have in this kind of story? This kind of story only talks about animals, but what does Henry and Mudge talk about?
How big he is.
Well, it does talk about how big he is, but is the only character Mudge? You can look at it in your book. No. So what else do we have in the Henry and Mudge story that we don't have in this story?
Henry.
Yeah, we have people, right? In our All in the Family story, it's not a story about people at all. But in the Henry and Mudge story, there are some characters who are people. And part of that is because All in the Family is an information story. It's only talking about information, in this case, about animals. Whereas Henry and Mudge is a realistic fiction story. So it's a make-up story, a made-up story talking about different characters that could be real, like Henry and Mudge, okay? So it's good to sometimes compare and contrast the different stories so you can see how they go together and how they're also a little bit different. And we'll actually do that with each story that we have, okay? Now, before we go on to we're going to talk about subjects and predicates. Before we do that, we're going to get up and do a little bit of wiggling. So let me stop this computer for just a second here.